In today's show, we discuss another of our popular Dynamite Conspiracies episodes. And today we talk about the Dyatlov Pass. What is it and what happened?
And now, the TNT Talk Show, daring to go where other podcasts fear to tread.
Hello, I'm Tony Fasula and I share the stage with my esteemed friend and colleague, Tayo Boya. Tayo, hello, my friend, once again. I hope you're keeping safe and well.
Yeah, what the hell, Tony? What you gonna do, eh? For those of you with video, when I tell you, you know how things are. Look at that, okay?
Oh,
Yeah, exactly. So the lucky ones die first, as I always said.
Oh, for the benefit of our
Yeah,
listeners rather than watchers, Tayo's got a really bloodshot eye, really quite angry it looks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's giving you trouble, or it's tender?
Yeah, it is tender. It is tender. Well, what the hell, right? What are you gonna do? See?
Oh dear.
That's what I always say.
Yeah, you need to get that checked out though.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I will.
Yeah, certainly do.
Mm.
Okay. In today's show, we discuss another one of our popular Dynamite Conspiracy episodes. And this is to discuss the I can't even say this. Do you want to correct? Dyatlov Pass.
Yes.
Now, many of you might be wondering, what the hell is this? I've not heard of this before. And that's what we will address. What is it and what actually happened? In fact, Tayo, if you want to just what you know about it, do you know much about it to enlighten our audience?
Next to nothing, actually. You came up with the topic and you said, do you want to talk about the Dyatlov Pass? And I had a look at it. And it's one of those interesting, what the heck happened kind of things. When something seemingly strange happened. If you don't think about it properly, it's very odd, it's very peculiar, and you think, ooh, I wonder what happened there. Anyway, long story short, I believe it was up to like 9 individuals, Russians, youthful.
Yeah,
I believe the oldest one was about 34, I believe.
34, very experienced.
Okay.
But they were all in their mid-20s, yeah. All of them were very experienced.
All of them were very experienced. They were experienced, and they were the Russian academic students of the Polytechnic, I believe, during the Soviet era.
Yes.
And they were all experienced hikers and climbers and skiers.
Yeah.
And they just decided just a bit of a holiday, not what they consider to be a holiday. I consider a holiday to be something that you spend at a cabana on the beach, drinking Mai Tais and rather excellent drinks and eating yourself silly. That's my idea of a holiday. The idea of a holiday was to get out into the rugged beyond and to get plenty of fresh air and exercise. And as anybody who knows me knows very well, I've always said that nothing will kill you faster than fresh air and exercise. Which is precisely what happened to these people. You get out there to the fresh air, and things will kill you. Anyway, these poor people were found in various states of undress. I think not all of them, but some of them were found in the states of undress, and all of them were found dead. And the reason that I mentioned the undress is because, of course, the temperatures in which they were found would have been in the negative 30s.
Yeah.
Which is a bit nippy, to say the least. And you don't want to be sort of gadding about. I don't want to be gadding about outside right now. It's -2, I think. And I feel like
-4 tonight, I believe.
Is it?
We are, yeah.
Right. And it's just a bit odd that 9 experienced campers. I'm going to leave some tidbits for Tony to tell you, but there are reasons why it's peculiar, and I'm sure Tony will tell you what they are, and then I'll come back with my ideas, and we'll see where we are.
Yeah, they were grade 2 skiers, climbers, as Tayo's already mentioned. In fact, the highest accolade at the Soviet era was grade 3, which some of them were, and the majority were just going to get that honor. So they were at the top of their game, almost classed as the best at skiing, climbing, etc. So these were not inexperienced people. But where the story sort of goes a little bit strange, because it was 1959, 9 of them set off, as Ty has already explained, into a trek near the mountains. So they knew the scenery, they experienced many walks and treks before in probably even worse conditions. And so they set up their tent in an area which, looking back on it, people sort of question whether it was totally safe, because it was potentially in an area which could be prone to avalanches. But subsequently they chose that area because they knew there'd not been any avalanches there, and there hadn't been, even post the search which eventually found their bodies. There was no real evidence for an avalanche, but an avalanche was, and we'll discuss that in more detail later, as a reason for their deaths, which doesn't add up. But anyway, what happened, the long and the short of it, was they're in a tent. The tent was cut from the inside. They all left on foot with no clothes on, literally just underwear, and some of them just had socks. So almost naked. Now, as Ty has already mentioned, temperatures of -30. Where were they going with no clothes? Secondly, they weren't leaving the tent under duress. It wasn't like they were running. They were walking. So what the heck happened? They left the tent, and there's evidence of them forming a campfire about 1,500 meters down the slope near a forest. And some of the branches above where they put the fire were removed, which was strange in itself, because if you're grabbing firewood, why would you go above the tree? You'd go and find it in the fallen bush. But anyway, and as Tayo said, 6 of them, when they were eventually all discovered, 6 of them died of hypothermia, but 3 died of blunt trauma. And that trauma was not inflicted by humans, because the autopsy came back and said it was as if they'd been in a car crash. The force was that strong that crushed their heads, chest, and it just resembled a car crash.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing apparent or footprints or anything of anybody else that could have caused this. So in summary, it's a very odd case, and there's many theories as to what actually happened to them.
Well, masterfully put. I think I contest the numbers. I believe it was 5 of them died of hypothermia, and 4 died in what I believe people describe as a snow pit, which is a pit that you dig into snow to protect yourself from the elements, and you light a fire and you warm up that way. And these are the 4 that died of blunt force trauma, I believe. So I think
So
those are the actual
they didn't
numbers.
fall, did they?
They didn't fall.
No. So how could they have died of blunt force trauma? And also another thing which I didn't actually mention was the 3 that had that were lying in a creek. 4 of them actually. I think you were right actually. 4 or 5. Oh, I've got to get my numbers right. 2 of them had missing eyes.
Yeah.
3 had soft tissue damage near the head and face. 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows, which again is odd, but it could have been animals perhaps that found the bodies.
Oh, don't forget that some of them were tinged had a brown tinge to their skin.
Yeah, to their skin.
I mean, essentially, ladies and gentlemen, these people were missing. I mean, sorry, they went camping late January, I believe it was. And the last journal entry that we have, the day that they reached the Dyatlov Pass, which wasn't called the Dyatlov Pass at the time. The reason it's called the Dyatlov Pass today is that the leader of the group was I forget his first name, but Igor Dyatlov.
Yeah.
So he gave his name eponymously has given the term to the pass. And so it is Dyatlov Pass, known as Dyatlov Pass now. So they reached the pass, we believe on the 1st of February, and a search party did not reach the campsite until the 26th of February. So they were almost a month exposed to the elements as far as we can tell, because they kept very good journals, and they took loads of pictures, which today we would call selfies. And these were all discovered by the Soviets, because at the time, this is 1959, by the way. This is back in 1959. It was found by the Soviet. Their records were found by the Soviets, and the Soviets did something. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. So they kept good records up until the 1st. So we think this what happened to them happened on the 1st of February, and it's a good reason, because that's when the journal entries stopped. And upon being found, although it was several weeks later, or 3 weeks later, there was like a few of them had a brown tinge to the skin.
Yeah. And
some of them had signs of radioactivity.
Yeah, radiation, yes.
Radiation.
It was really weird.
So obviously, straight away, the usual suspects jump out of the woodwork and start shouting, aliens, aliens. And it's like, oh goodness, why would aliens chase 9 people into the snow, not take them away if they're going to take them for, experiments on them? Whatever they did to them, like take eyebrows and eyes and tongue, and then leave the rest of them, it's just weird. And by the way, there was no sign of a struggle.
No, none whatsoever.
There's no sign of struggle either in the tent, and I think Tony has already mentioned that the departure from the tent was orderly. It wasn't, the footsteps were firm and evenly spaced, and these were people walking away. These were not people running. They were not running away. Yeah. So again, they didn't seem to be under any pressure, any duress to leave the tent. It's one of the mysteries about it. And the radioactivity is another mystery. Why were there signs of radioactivity? And the missing parts of soft tissue damage, again, that's peculiar, because in a sense, it's like, why would animals eat some parts and not the rest?
Yeah, exactly.
So there we are. So
yeah,
this is what makes it a bit mysterious.
And also, in the cold environment such as that, if it was an avalanche, this is why I don't actually personally. The official narrative was it was an avalanche, although that was the Russian official narrative at the time.
No, no, they said the Russian. I didn't write it down. The Soviet explanation was a violent occurrence of nature that they could not overcome. It was carefully worded, but avalanche was never mentioned.
Well, they did do an inquiry, and they did look at it and try to find the root cause, and the likeliest scenario was, in their opinion, an avalanche. But
I challenged that. It wasn't.
That was the narrative.
No, it wasn't, because I don't know who said that. My thing was the report. My reporting from the Soviet report. So I don't know where your people got avalanche from. From the Soviet report at the time. This is back in 1959. The Soviet report which, by the way, was later suppressed. And we can get to that. We can get to that in due course. But it wasn't that the report was suppressed. It was the what do you call it? Those journals that I mentioned, the journals and the many of the pictures and many of the photographs were well, taken away by the Soviet authorities, and the story was suppressed. And that, I mean, we've got to it now, so we might as well talk about it. The fact is that 3 members of the 6 were somehow connected in various shades and degrees of intimacy. They were connected with the secret services. So some opinion is that the Soviets were playing games with American spies. Because apparently, in those days, the Soviets used to play games with Americans by pretending that there were radioactive issues, finds all over the country, all over the Soviet Union. The Americans become interested and suspicious that it might be a new Soviet military installation and that they didn't know about. And they would send their spies in, and the Soviets would catch the spies because they'd noticed the American interest. So if you tie that into the fact that that I believe it was 2 members of the team had radiation on them, were radioactive, so to speak, and 3 of them were involved in the secret services, and the oldest one, the one I mentioned, was 34 years old. Joined the party very, very late in the planning stage. So the thinking is that those 3 were somehow involved in a sting operation and were meant to meet up, were meant to plant radioactive material somewhere in some remote place, and then contact American spies who would go and go out looking for this place and then would be nabbed.
Right. So
and
it
that
was
would
a
explain
honey
why
trap, or not
it was a honey
trap.
trap. Yes.
Something
No,
similar.
the honey trap is a very specific kind of trap.
It was a trap.
Sex.
Yeah. Some
Yeah.
sort
Okay.
of, yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of evidence to back that up, other than the fact that you're right. They were part of the Russian
NKVD, I think it was in those days, which is the Russian Soviet. We always say Russian, don't we? But actually, it was Soviet.
Soviet back then, yeah.
It was the Soviet secret police.
You said, where did I get my information from?
Yeah.
It was from the investigative committee of the Russian Federation. So they're the ones. Yeah, they're the ones who did the test. Did it after the Soviet era. So they went in and did a complete review in 2015 of this whole episode, and they concluded that it was most likely an avalanche, which they weren't able to deal with. But again, it raises questions of this official narrative, in so much that post the event there wasn't a lot of snow, and post the event, we've already touched on it, they didn't leave the tent in a rush. And if you got an avalanche, you'd want to get the hell out of there as soon as possible. You wouldn't want to hang around. That the fact that they left in an orderly fashion but without their clothes, that doesn't add up. It just seems rather peculiar. And the fact that we've already touched on, 3 or 4 of them, 3 I believe, had this physical trauma, which at this present time still can't be explained. We are a bit at a loss as to what it could be. There was another idea that was proposed, was the military tests. Did you hear about this? There was the Soviets had this parachute mine exercise, because you've already touched on it. Actually, there were reports that some things were flying in the sky, or looked to be flying in the sky. And what the Soviets did do, they used to have these parachute mine exercises. So they dropped these parachutes from the sky, and these mines didn't blow up making contact with the ground. They'd blow up just before the surface of the ground.
Proximity fuses.
Yeah. And they'd create quite a loud explosion. And if they'd been testing those, that would cover the slight radiation. That could also cover the part that they got slightly brown faces, and also the fear factor, because these things, if these went off, you wouldn't know what was going on, and it could be quite scary if you're in that situation, because obviously the climate there isn't the best. So that could have been a reason, but again, that only seems to cover the radiation bit, possibly, or the tanning of their skin. Other than that, again, would we find evidence after the inquiry of these military items? I doubt that would be the case, because the whole point of them being military items is that the military would keep them secret. So there would never be any evidence to back that up. But other people who were camping in a similar location, although still, many miles away, saw things floating down in the distance, which was near the Dyatlov Pass, as it is now called. So they could.
It's a little fantastic.
It does sound rather fantastic,
because
without
it means
evidence.
that in this huge vast remoteness, it was highly coincidental that they were dropping these parachute mines where these 9 people just happened to be camping. Don't forget that the 9 people actually not exactly got lost, but they took a wrong turn. They weren't meant to be on that
That's
pass.
right. That's
So
right.
it was snowing quite heavily at the time, and they took a wrong turn, and they ended up on one side of the mountain as opposed to the other.
Yeah.
And that side of the mountain on which they were wasn't where they were meant to be. So, and it was, like I said, it's a super remote area anyway. That taking them days to get there. It's not exactly, where you think that the Russian military would be able to carry out large-scale exercise, so whatever scale exercises, because yes, you want somewhere remote, but you don't want it to take days to get there, man. You want to get there in a few hours, or maybe at most the end of the day.
But if you're conducting tests, and you wouldn't need to trek there, you'd probably do the tests from planes, which you could get there in a matter of hours. So
yeah, but who's observing them then?
Observing them, yes, but again,
you got to drop them where people can observe them, because they want to see the effects. So that's why you have remote test areas there. We have remote test areas in the UK, but it's not going to be where it's going to take you, yonks to get to. Yeah.
I mean, going back to the fact that they got lost, they didn't really get lost. I
didn't say they got lost. I said they took the wrong turn.
Yeah, they knew where they were. They realized where they were.
Precisely, and if they had survived that event, whatever happened, they would have in the morning they'd have reoriented themselves, and they'd have been fine.
Indeed, which was the plan.
They weren't in danger. They had food. They had all sorts of things. So they weren't in danger. They were not by no means in distress when they made camp. Because we have a picture of them. I don't know how many people are in the picture, but the very last picture they ever took, I think it was like 3 or 4 members, and they're standing and smiling. They're happy and relaxed.
Absolutely.
Yes, but you've talked about the orbs, which I wanted to tie into the good old alien thing, because there is one report. Now, I don't know which report this is in. Oh, by the way, speaking about reports, your report was 2015 Russian Federation report.
Yeah.
I'm actually talking about the 1959 Soviet report.
Okay.
So I think the Russians had another look at the Dyatlov Pass incident, apparently in 2015, like you say, and then drew some conclusions, which aren't far off from where I'm going to go at the end of the day. Okay. But yeah, they're not that far off from where I'm going to go. But in the meantime, considering every possibility, what is interesting is that there are reports, at least from the Soviet era, I don't know about from modern era, there are reports that the tops of the trees were singed. And
right. I wasn't aware of that one.
Well, this is what gave some impetus to this UFO thing. And the reason that the Soviets suppressed the report was actually to do with the constant references to UFOs. That is why apparently they suppressed the report. They didn't want questions being asked about UFOs.
That's interesting. Is that because the suppression was to actually cover up evidence of UFOs there?
I don't believe so. I think the Soviet Union was a very paranoid, very peculiar state in which it wanted to seem supreme in everything. It didn't want anything to seem bigger and stronger and more powerful than it. And the idea that there were aliens who could come in and destroy the Soviet Union with these would have really run counter to their thinking. I grew up at a time when we felt we would all die in a confrontation with the Soviets. So when I was growing up, there were many, many films, spy movies, in which Western agents were always trying to put one on Soviet agents, and being made by Western filmmakers, we always won, for one reason, one way or another. But it was a highly paranoid time, and there were actually, there was this like secret battle going on between the two blocks. I mean, on occasion, agents were killed, on both sides in mysterious ways. And that kind of paranoia, which existed at the time, is hard for people today to, if you didn't grow up in that era, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. But it is very in line with the thinking of the day that they would have suppressed information if people were saying it must have been aliens. This is in the Soviet Union, because the Soviets were supremo and masters of the world in their own right, which wasn't the case, of course.
Well, although, I mean, there's other conspiracy theories regarding this story, and the first
as long as you don't say Yeti, I'm happy.
Well, that was one. We had to bring that up, but there's no evidence of this.
There's one fuzzy picture of something that didn't look like a Yeti.
Well, there's no footprints for a start.
Yeah, exactly.
And there was no indication of any distress by any of the party. But it is odd regarding the the physical trauma that they had. Although one theory is that they fell.
No, because they were in a pit.
Boy, this is what I mean. That's where that theory
how can you fall in a pit?
Indeed. So how could you fall and get trauma to that degree?
Well, there is a reason. It's all part of my grand theory. My grand theory all works out very nicely and takes everything into account. It's a super story.
And it's the answer, is it? Or is it still hold some
Well, because it answers the outstanding questions, then I think it's fine. The only thing it doesn't address is the so-called burnt tops of the trees, singed treetops. Okay. I don't know why the treetops should have been singed. I don't know that they were singed. I've only heard it in this one single statement. I don't even know where the statement came from.
Oh, okay.
So
does that actually cover the fact that it even happened, or is it just a bolt-on to the story that may have been?
Precisely. I don't know where it came from. But, I mean, it's unfortunate that the Soviets buried the reports of the day. So, I don't know. It was said, I believe, to support the UFO theory.
Oh, okay. Go on then. Do you want to elaborate on what you're? Are we at that point now? We're halfway through the show. Are
Really?
we?
Well,
Yeah.
we've poo-pooed the Yeti thing, which is quite silly. Although, like I said, there was one fuzzy picture of someone in a of something. Well, I'm going to call it someone in a dark shape peering around a tree, which was one of the pictures from the cameras of the deceased.
Now that's interesting. I wasn't aware of that one.
Okay. So there was a picture
was
like
it
that.
clearly a figure? Or...
Yes, it was a figure. Well, it seemed to me to be a figure of a person.
Right.
It didn't look animal-like at all.
Right.
It looked like a person who was wearing clothes, well suited for the cold.
Right.
And it was black and white picture. Obviously, they didn't have color picture.
Yeah,
Because a lot of people had color picture in those days.
Mm.
It was a black and white picture, and the shape happened to be very dark. So that would just have been a question of the setting of the camera.
Yeah.
The what do they call it now? The white-black balance.
Oh, right. Okay.
The white-black balance, which makes things look darker and whiter, than they really are in real life. So I think that's what it was. It didn't look particularly tall. It just looked like a person coming around a tree.
So it was an actual person, as far as you're aware.
As far as I'm concerned, it was an actual person.
So does this lead on to your theory?
No, my theory's got nothing to do with Yetis, for goodness sake.
No, but could it be that it's not a Yeti, but actually someone from the military spying on them? So could they have instigated?
You were following people who were camping and they were going out into the wilderness and they were going to be gone for, I believe it was up to 6 weeks or something.
Mm.
What are you following them for? Well, what are you going to do? What's the point? And like I said, there was no sign of a struggle.
No.
And the bodies did not show signs of struggling. They died of hypothermia.
Yeah.
Right? They died of hypothermia. So anyway, and of course there was the case of the missing flesh from one person's hand. Remember?
Yes.
Did you read about that? Which
I
was in his mouth.
Yeah.
In the corpse's mouth. So the corpse the person had bitten into his hand so fiercely that he was able to take flesh off it.
Wow.
And have that, and then died. So, anyway, here's the thing.
Yeah.
You're quite right that the Dyatlov Pass is not known for avalanches.
Yeah.
Not before and not since. And in general, you'd be right. However, an avalanche occurs when a layer of snow slips against another layer beneath it.
Yes.
Okay. And if you think about the way I had it explained to me is that there are two books, one atop the other.
Yep.
And first of all, the lying level. Can I take this moment to just have a brief digression and to just lambast the Americans for saying laying? You lay something down. Okay.
Yes.
To lay is to put down.
Yes.
Right? Back in the day, the what's it now? The slang for having relations with other person was to lay them. You see, it's to lay is to do something to something. Okay.
Okay.
It's not lie. Lie is to recline.
Yeah.
All right. Can we please stop saying and then he lay. What did they always say? And I found it laying down. What do you mean he found it laying down? You didn't find him putting something down. You found him lying down, for crying out loud. It freaks me out, man. And that abuse of language is insinuating itself into the younger British generation, who are a bunch of airheads who just soak up Americanisms without really thinking about it.
Indeed.
So you're beginning to hear it in this country now. I just stop them and say, we are not Americans. Okay? Please.
This is your school teacher side coming through.
This is my school teacher side. So that was a big digression. I had to get it off my chest because it really gets my goat. And anyway, so if you have one layer of snow lying atop another one, like two books, and then you start inclining the books, on one end. So you create a slope.
Yeah.
It turns out that at about 20 degrees, one of the books will slide off. The top book will slide.
Well, weight
Right?
bearing, it's
Yeah,
Okay.
like that. It's about 20 degrees. Same thing with avalanches. They occur in slopes that have at least 20 or more, a greater angle of 20 or greater. And would it interest you to know that the Dyatlov Pass has an angle of 23 degrees?
But if I could take you back on what you said, and I said at the beginning of the show, there was no evidence of any avalanche before or after the event. So
this is very true.
Okay.
It's very true. Now, if you think about those books that I was talking about, right? You think about the two books that I was talking about, and they're inclined.
Yeah.
Just imagine that at the bottom of this book here,
the top book.
All right. At the bottom, there's a little ledge or something, if you like.
Okay.
Okay. And imagine that someone comes along and digs a tent just at that ledge by bad luck.
Okay.
Weakening the ledge that has kept the snow in place.
Okay.
They dig the ledge, and then a little bit more snow falls. Remember that they were building the state here because snow was falling.
Yes.
So a little bit more snow falls, and eventually it gets just heavy enough to start an avalanche.
Okay.
Now, instead of starting a proper avalanche, like a real avalanche that you get in, say, the Alps or somewhere, wherever avalanches happen,
which falls from a big height.
they started a mini, what I understand is called a table avalanche, and isn't as bad as the avalanche that we see in movies and things.
Yeah.
It's really like a sliding of a top layer of snow.
Okay.
But if you're in your tent in the middle of the night, you have no idea that it's just a slithering and a sliding and a table avalanche. It sounds to you like a genuine avalanche. And you're waking up and you're groggy and you're frightened.
Okay.
So what do? You grab your knife, because what are you afraid of in an avalanche? Suffocation.
Indeed.
That's what kills people in avalanches. And these were experienced hikers. They knew that. So they grabbed their knives and they cut their way out of the tent.
Yep.
To escape from the avalanche as they see it, and to escape into freedom. So there was no panic. It was they cut themselves out. That is where the panic would have been. And then they escaped into the night. They thought
you would still do some running, and there was no evidence of running.
Yeah, but why would you run? The avalanche has stopped. You've opened up. It's stopped. But you think it's dangerous. Maybe more is coming. Right? Okay. You've just woken up. Yeah, you've just woken up.
You would still run just to be on the safe side.
No, that's the thing. If you run, actually, you could actually trigger something. Couldn't you?
So you're thinking that they walked to not make it worse, that their footsteps
were deliberate, and they weren't walking just. It turns out that they were walking with purpose. They had left cleverly, again, experienced hikers. They had left a second stash about what did I say it was 1,500 kilometers, 1,500 meters from the tent.
Yeah.
So in case something happens to your things in place one, you can go to place B, and you've got backup supplies. Very clever system. I never thought about it.
Yeah.
And that's where they were walking to. So they weren't, crazy or anything. They did have a plan. Unfortunately, they weren't properly dressed.
Okay.
They went out in clothes, their underwear, basically. Many of them.
Okay. If they realized that it wasn't as bad as they thought.
They didn't realize. I never said that. I said they didn't realize it was as bad as they thought. They thought they had triggered an avalanche. They thought they were blooming. They just thought that they were blooming lucky to be alive, right? Yeah, and they were walking towards the backup location, the location of their backup supplies.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it does no. Again, there's no evidence of a backup supply because they made.
No,
a
I'm
fire
not making this
there.
up. It was found in that Soviet report. There was backup supplies. It's
Okay.
not. I'm not speculating about it. That's where they were walking towards,
Okay.
right?
They
And
left the
before,
light on in the tent.
I'm not. I don't know that.
Yeah, they
No,
left the light on in the
I
tent.
suppose the last man out is not going to turn around and turn the light off. What would you do that for? You just want to get away before, the rest of the avalanche comes down.
But also maybe to go back and spot it if there's a
Well,
light.
it's possible. If you want to get the hell out of somewhere before something terrible happens, I think you just want to get the hell out before something terrible
Yeah,
happens,
yeah.
right? So the first two that were found,
Mhm.
just hypothermia just got up to them. It was minus 30 degrees C.
Yeah,
They were in
which
there.
is very quickly how you can lose the feeling in your body and die. Yeah.
I know, between my back door and my car, in just minus 2 degrees this morning, I felt that I was going to flip and die, and I had loads of clothes, I had loads of layers on and everything.
Yeah.
We've gone soft in Britain.
No, it is dangerous. It doesn't take a long exposure to the elements.
Exactly, because what they call the wind chill factor is amazing.
Yes.
It seems like those two didn't get very far. The third, and they couldn't get up, I think, is what happened. And I don't know if those are some of the ones who had their clothes taken by the others, because there's evidence they were raided, right? The clothes were raided.
So that means they hadn't lost their mind.
No, they hadn't lost their minds. They were just very, very cold, unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah.
The others tried to build a fire, not that far from I don't know how many 100 meters, but they hadn't reached this other place I'm talking about, second location. And they seem to have climbed the tree. One of them seems to have scaled the tree to get branches, because the ones on the lowest would have been wet, and the ones further out the top are drier, which is, what they call woodcraft. It's like, because you get out there and you have the experience, you know that. I think you said earlier, are you the one who said earlier that
the branches in the tree were missing?
That you thought they were wet or something? That why would you want that? It's because the ones at the top would be dry enough for you to start burning, as opposed to the ones at the bottom, because the ones at the top, they melt onto the lower ones and make them wet, but they themselves are relatively dry. So that's the climbing of the tree. That's what explains that. They tried to light a fire, and then they got as close to the fire as possible, but they were suffering from hypothermia, and by that time they were suffering from loss of feeling.
Yeah, so you'd realize you're getting burnt. You don't realize
you wouldn't realize you're getting burnt. You singe yourself brown, basically, hence the brown color of skin. And if you get too close, you could even singe your eyebrows. You could singe your eyebrows off and not realize it. And then when you died, it would just look like you had no eyebrows. There might not be, without proper autopsy and everything, I don't know, they might not be able to tell that this is the exact case that took out your eyebrows. If you had lost feeling and you were testing for feeling, you could bite your hand, and you could bite it quite deep because you're looking for feeling. Obviously, as you start biting into it, you don't feel anything. And you could bite more. By the way, your teeth
causes that.
By the way, your teeth can't feel anything. So you don't even know how deep you're going.
Yeah.
Until you get to where you go, ow, which could be quite deep. That's what he was testing, was, how bad is my situation here? So with knowledge of forethought, it's quite harrowing to know that you're testing yourself and you're realizing, I'm dying. So 3 of them are found. So it was 2 found first, 3 built a fire, 4 didn't wait and thought they were strong enough to march on, and they did. Is that correct now?
Did they go back?
How many?
Did they not go back?
No, they went further down the mountain towards their stash.
Okay.
How many have I accounted for now? I'm supposed to account for 5. Yeah. 2 dropped first. Then 3 built a fire and tried to stay alive, but they didn't make it. 4
That's the
got further
remaining
down.
4, yeah.
The remaining 4 got down, and then they built a fire. They had enough strength to build a fire pit, and I think Igor Dyatlov was amongst them. They built a fire pit, where a second stroke of really bad luck followed them. Where they built a fire pit was like a shed against, like an L shape against the slope of the mountain. It was an L shape. Okay, so they built properly. They did everything out of the book, but they had bad luck. Apparently, there was an underwater stream that passed just behind them, which they wouldn't have known at the time. But it was running. Don't ask me how in that temperature and everything. It was running, and it loosened enough snow that it came crashing down into and onto and on top of them. So it wasn't that they fell; it's that snow fell on them. Do you see? Snow fell on them, and obviously snow is extremely heavy. I mean, if anyone has actually tried to make a large snowball, have you ever tried to build a snowball and then you pick it up and you think, "Whoa!"
You can't pick it up. No,
it's really snow is tremendously heavy. So somebody did the sums. Like I said, unfortunately, I was a bit hurried in my research. I wish I could tell you what the sums are, but it really tallies with being hit by a car. Because what was interesting to us, but sad for the people involved, is that the damage to their skeletons was blunt force trauma, and without producing damage to the flesh. So it wasn't someone using some kind of it wasn't like the usual attack of either an animal or a human, right? It was a very strong attack from something very powerful and blunt, but spread wide enough over the body to not cause flesh to be damage to the flesh.
Yeah, it was underneath. Yeah? Okay, interesting.
And obviously, how did they find them? They found them in May. So this happened in February. They found the others, but these 4 they found them in late May after the snow had melted, revealing these people. You see? So they were covered by this part of the snow that killed them.
Okay, that makes sense in that respect. But what about...
Oh, yeah, and the radiation. Is that what you're going to ask me about?
I was going to say, where's the radiation come into it?
There's thorium in their lamps. Thorium is a radioactive substance.
But if they left without their clothes, why did they have the presence of mind to pick up a lamp?
No, they didn't. I'm not saying they took lamps with them. They had already been exposed to it. They had already been exposed to the thorium. And 2 of those people that I mentioned, 2 of those 3, I'm not going to call them dodgy characters. They were just people working for the Secret Services. 2 of them worked in atomic research and had been involved in clearing up a nuclear accident that supposedly, I don't know, it was the person that the report I read said was supposedly almost as bad as Chernobyl in the Soviet Union, but had been covered up.
Not Tunguska, is it?
Tunguska. That was a different era. That was early 20s.
Yeah, well...
Yeah, that was a different era.
Okay.
These people, obviously, these are young men. They wouldn't have been alive at the time, I think.
No, 1959, no, maybe not.
They wouldn't have been alive at the time. So, and they worked, like I said, they worked in the atomic research and everything like that, so they could just been contaminated for that. And there was thorium in their lamps. I don't know why you'd have thorium in your lamps. Sounds kind of weird to me. What is thorium doing in your lamps? But apparently they had lamps with thorium in them, and which to me would have meant that all of them should have been exposed to it because all of them were in the same
that was in the same tent, so that doesn't add up.
So also, that's not it, unless it's the people who are carrying the lamps in their knapsacks that were exposed to it the most.
Possibly. I mean, that still doesn't account for... I mean, you described about the biting of the hand. Maybe that makes sense to assess, have you got a sensation, you can't feel it. It doesn't explain the missing tongue or the missing eyes, though.
Well, that you'd have to put down to animal predation. Those are soft tissues. So you have a wolverine.
Yeah, but you've given an example that they've been covered in snow. An animal's not going to bury underneath and then eat those particular body parts. If they were exposed on the surface, that would make sense. But if they've been covered by snow because the snow was so heavy in order to cause that blunt force trauma, then they would be covered up by several layers of snow.
Yes, but I also said that they were found in May, didn't I? So they were predated, obviously, just before they were found, when they had already been exposed because of the melting snow.
So you're saying they lost those parts literally before they were or roundabout when they were exposed and found?
Yes, because they were frozen. How would you tell when it was ripped off by an animal? An animal would be going after soft, easily accessible body parts, tissue, like a wolverine would do.
A tongue and the eyes. Seems strange because if there's any body parts, your tongue is inside your body.
Unless you die like this. I'm not joking. I mean, with jaws agape is actually a famous line from Chaucer.
Yes, it is. Actually.
Called death, the jaws agape.
Yeah. Your mouth and tongue are exposed.
Yep.
So yeah, but the eyes, don't know.
Eyes just there begging for it. I mean, look at my eye.
Yeah, but you would maybe think the nose would be an easier target, or the ears. But
ears are cartilage, aren't they? Really? So it's crunch.
The nose is cartilage. If you're going to say that,
nose is cartilage too. If you want
the eyes aren't necessarily, something that a predator would eat. It would go for the fleshy part of the body, which has got fat, and that's where the succulent.
That's where the good stuff is, isn't it?
Well, yeah. So it just seems again okay that although your synopsis and what you believe could have happened does cover quite a few of these, it's by no means completely foolproof. It's
well, no, I mean it's not foolproof. I just think it's better than Aliens.
No, I'm not saying personally I didn't think it was Aliens, although it might have been. No. There's always that one. If all else fails, blame Aliens.
Oh yes, or Putin, one of them. Aliens did it or Putin did it.
The bit about the military though, the floating, what they call the parachute
that I just find to be fantastical. I really do. I think it's hard to access area. And why would you do it there? You want to observe the effects of what you're doing. So why would you make it really, really difficult for you to do that?
How do you know this, though? You're making an assumption here. You're making an assumption that whoever was observing it was close enough to where these kids, I suppose, or young adults happen to have been. Because if you're doing an experiment or a test such as this over a particular landscape, you don't have to be right up to it. You can just observe it from a safe distance. So it could have been the other direction of where the campers happened to have been. So they saw it and were afraid. Because remember, I said that there was evidence of another group in a different area, but were overlooking the Dyatlov Pass. Have I said that right? No, it's no, I haven't. But yeah, Dyatlov Pass were observing it and saw things in the sky. So it wasn't the people, the records of the people who were deceased. It was recorded by somebody else further away, overlooking the Dyatlov Pass. So that's where that one came from.
Well, you'd have to say that those people were observing the Dyatlov Pass, and they saw the parachute mines, but they didn't see. By the way, wouldn't a parachute mine just be more than a light to be an explosion, wouldn't it? Nobody reported explosions. So, okay, we have lights, which you're saying is the parachute coming down or whatever it is. Where were the explosions then? Also, they never saw the other people, the military people who would have been observing the experiment. I'm talking about the military people to observe the experiment. You carried out an experiment, you want to observe it. So you go a safe distance away. Obviously, you don't want to drop it on top of you.
Of course.
But you stay a safe distance away, and then you observe it. And I'm saying this pass was in too remote an area, inconvenient side of a mountain. Where do you situate yourself? And
in order to look at it.
In order to look at it, it's just what really.
I'm
super
There's so many conspiracies around this particular story, and it's still not. There's no adequate answer. I mean, we've covered a few here, but I'm not. Although yours sounds quite plausible, I'm still not totally convinced on it because there are still gaps.
Well, if we could convince people, then there will be no flat Earth society people. So not everybody can be convinced by what I consider to be good evidence. We in a few episodes ago we discussed what is good evidence. I think we seriously underrated the topic because although we discussed it for an hour, we barely scratched at the surface of that, and we were in a deep, heated debate, and we still haven't got our head around what makes good evidence. If we can nail down what makes good evidence and agree what makes good evidence, we'll be able to use the lens of that agreement to inspect anything and decide whether there's good evidence for an argument or not.
Indeed. Although we can say that people have been convicted with circumstantial evidence, but there's enough of it to bring a case.
Yes, people have been wrongly convicted.
Indeed, that happens all the time, even when the evidence appears, black and white. So there's obviously things here, but in this particular story, it's really unusual because the unanswered questions which are clear are the fact that they left the tent. If they know that the tent wasn't under danger, you would leave through the normal route. If they were in fear, they wanted to leave quickly, so they slit the tent and got out. But then once you realize you're not in danger, would you not then go and grab clothes? That'd be one of the first things you would do. Because surely they're not stupid enough to realize that they can't last out there without the appropriate clothing. So despite you getting out of danger quickly, without clothes, you are in trouble anyway. So you're not aiding your escape by escaping without suitable clothing. It's almost like they have to go hand in hand. So I don't quite understand that. There are
we are looking back at this event with the benefits of a 63-year hindsight, 2020 vision.
Indeed.
They were sleeping, tired after a long day's trek. They woke up, thought they were being suffocated by an avalanche. They broke out of it.
Yeah.
And there is this mindset that you can form in the time of stress. Okay, there's an experiment, and I don't know who performed the experiment. I'm pulling this out from the deep recesses of my mind. It may or may not even be true, but I seem to remember that there is an experiment where you startle people in a room and you lock the door and you give them a certain amount of time. Say you have 20 seconds to evacuate the room. You have 19 and you start counting down. Yeah. And this, whatever's going to happen, it's going to happen as you count down. And these people are stuck and they're trying to open the door, right? And nobody thinks about the window. That I assume that for this experiment, it's on the ground floor, so you're not going to harm yourself, right? You would think, you and I would say, why don't you just open the window? Right? That's calm mind thinking.
Yeah.
When you got this mono thing, it's like, we have to escape the door. We've got to escape through the door, and everybody's like, help, I'll help you to pull. And you're all trying to pull. It's like, but the door it doesn't even have a lock, and you start making up that, how come we can't open the door?
Yeah.
The door, now this is what I'm adding to it now. To make the experiment more useful, you'd make it that they know that the door doesn't lock. And they know how to open the door. So first of all, they try to pull it. Then they try to push it, which doesn't make any sense. And then, they can't figure out, this is the way out.
Because you're under stress.
You're under stress.
And that clouds your judgment and you think.
I mean, you and I now sitting here, if they happen to us, we'll climb out in a panic. Well, it's worth getting our clothes because look, man, we're not going to live. That's a reasonable, rational thought. And by the way, we're awake. We haven't just woken up.
Yeah.
You've just woken up and you're even trying to assess the situation as you're reacting.
Yes,
it's a lot going on. It's like why pilots fly into the ground. You just think, dude, pull up your gear. And then, I'm
knowing
watching it
to
like this, and
respond rather than react. But it's knowing how to respond rather than react. React is primitive. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response, and it's overcoming that with some sense, and that's what takes skill to master. And when you're under stress, your primitive part of the brain,
so-called reptilian brain, which is this evolutionist people mudding the water again. Well, we don't have a reptilian brain.
Not reptilian. It's not reptilian, but
our primitive brain.
It's primitive brain. There is fact about the primitive brain, but
so why do we call it primitive though? Why don't we call it like deep-seated brain?
It hasn't been because it hasn't evolved.
See,
in the same.
You're using evolution now.
It hasn't changed.
That's another word for evolution. Why would it change?
There is evidence to show that the frontal cortex has developed far more than the rear.
Where did you get early brains from? To check it to where did you get early brains from?
Well, we're compare from because I'm mindful of the time here. We're nearly at the end of the hour.
Yeah, where did you get before? Just grace us with your knowledge. Where did you get early brains from to compare it to our brains now?
Because when you take away the front part, which is removed, which it can be lobotomized and things like that, people revert back to primitive behavior.
No, you said it has changed over time. It's gone bigger. Well, I want to know how you know that. How do you know?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah, there we are. Because you can't know, because it's evolutionist speculation.
Well, that's the best
speculate
theory we have
that
so
it's
far.
not even a theory you have. You just pull that out of the air. Because when I say to you, where's the evidence? You're supposed, as a pro-rationalist and a pro-science person, you're supposed to be able to tell me, this is how we know. Not, we don't know. That's not science.
Well, I don't know, because I'm not a specialist in brain technology.
Yeah, well, I'll give you enough time.
About it, but I don't know how it's evolved.
Every episode from now on, I'll challenge you until you've gone and asked someone who is a specialist, how do they know? I know that they don't know. That's what I know. I challenge them. They don't know because there are no brains for you to test against. You've not seen the brain over a period of time. If you had access to brains from 1 million years ago and access to brains from 500,000 years ago, and then can compare it to our brains, then you would have a series of brains.
So you're saying that our brain is fully formed from the outset, and we just split into two
That's the evidence. Well, why would I not? Why would I not? That's my evidence. My evidence is those are the brains we've got. Yeah, it's been like this.
So why have the two parts? Why have the two clear parts of the brain?
Because we were designed that way. And next,
designed that way. Okay, let's leave that for another time. Let's carry on with this.
We need to have another good argy-bargy about evolution. And yeah.
Anyway, we need to have a guest on the show, but we'll do that. But listen, what's your final conclusion of this? Because I'm mindful we've reached the end of the hour.
I'm happy that the report I read explains everything satisfactorily. I don't believe in the parachute mine theory. That doesn't wash with me.
I'm not a fan of that either.
I'm happy with the ledge, the table avalanche theory. Pictures show that whatever it was that started them wasn't very powerful at all because there were skis. You know, when you're going into a tent, you stick your skis in the snow and it's standing upright. Those weren't even knocked over.
Well, then what was the danger for them to leave?
Well, they did hack their way out. What they didn't do was they didn't just unzip the tent and walk out. They actually cut their way out of the tent.
Yeah, that's right. But that would then
so that is the evidence of an avalanche of snow covering them. Because why didn't they just open unzip the front? Maybe they tried and they couldn't. And there was snow, was blocking it. So they cut their way out. Because that's what a table avalanche would do. It actually buttresses the story of the theory of a table avalanche.
Anyway, we could discuss this further if we had more time, but unfortunately we have reached the end of the show. My conclusion is I'm still open to the answers because none of them have, in my opinion, adequately answered everything. Although the slow avalanche is an interesting one. I hadn't heard that one. I was under the impression that the avalanche theory was from a proper avalanche, which there's no evidence for. But this one, the slow sliding one, that's new. I've not heard that before. So I'll have to look into that a bit more, but it does hold up far better than some of the others we've already discussed. But other than that, you don't believe it's a Yeti, UFOs, or anything like that?
I don't believe in evolution either.
Neither do I, although the fact that the body parts disappeared in a weird way, that still
animal predation
throws some dice. Okay, unfortunately, we have reached the end of the show for another week.
Bye.